So can you actually predict GPA of incoming freshmen? And if so, how do you do it? And if you do have incoming freshmen that aren't doing well, or anyone, can you actually improve their GPA while they're in school? The answer to both is yes. And I'm going to show you some data to show you why that's true and then how we can replicate that in the school environment. So we're going to be predicting as well as increasing GPA. So again, back to our original question, can you actually predict success in college with newly accepted applicants? Well, the University of Pennsylvania's Division of Applied Positive Psychology actually tried to do that with optimism and explanatory style. Explanatory style is how you explain things to yourself, your inner voice. Now, the way University of Pennsylvania has accepted students in the past, they used a prediction model, which was looking at 3 criteria: grades in high school, college board scores, and achievement test results. Like many schools doing the same thing. They created a regression equation, which was called the predictive index. And all this is taking a look at what they had done in high school, college boards, and achievement, then how they did in freshman year. And then they curve fitted weighting high school grades, college board scores, and achievement results. So let's say they got a B average. They found that if you played around with the weightings of high school grades, college board scores, and achievement, maybe triple weight to high school, double weight to college board, and 1 weight to achievement test results, you'd be able to predict GPA. However, there's a problem with that. You're curve fitting to back data, you're making a statistical guess, and 2 kinds of errors were coming out in real time. The first one was a small number of students were doing much worse than predicted. So even though it was a small number, it was a horrible experience for those students. The other one is that a much larger number of students were doing a lot better than predicted, so the model actually wasn't that good. Now, what they actually did to test this out is they did a MetLife case study. So they went to MetLife, the insurance company, and what they found was 60,000 applicants were trying to become life insurance agents. Only 8.3% were hired. However, it's very similar to what was happening in freshman year at colleges. 50% of the new hires were quitting in year 1, and 80 were quitting by year 4. And there was a $30,000 training cost per agent. So that was actually $75 million of annual hiring cost loss, because 2,500 were quitting each year times 30,000 is 75 million. So the question was, can we do a better job hiring? And when they discovered yes, through explanatory style, that actually changed how the admissions was done at University of Pennsylvania. It was based on this study. So here's what they were doing. It's called the ASQ, Attributional Style Questionnaire. And the theory they came up with was less academically qualified students with higher levels of optimism can outperform their peers. Again, it's how they explain failure to themselves. So what they did with Penn in 1987 is they did a test, and 1/3 of the students did much better or much worse than predicted without the ASQ. So they let the students in the same way, but then they tested them with the ASQ, and they found that, again, 20 students did much worse than what they were expecting, and 100 did much better. So this was just using the old model. They actually did the same thing at West Point for the class of 1991, trying to figure out who quits. Again, who's going to not do well in college, who's going to quit after they come in after freshman year. And it's this kind of explanatory style that would predict who is going to quit West Point, Penn, as well as college in general. These are the kind of things that these students would say after failure. It's me, it's going to last forever, and it's going to undermine everything I do. So this is pretty dark, it's very pessimistic. Now, the ASQ, the Attributional Style Questionnaire, is trying to measure the range of deep pessimism to irrepressible optimism. So the basic idea is the more optimism a student has, the more persistent they will be in trying to do better, and the more immunity they will have to being helpless. Now, here's what explanatory style is. Imagine this is what you say to yourself when you hear the word no. Now, let's say you don't do well in class. An optimist would say, the class is boring, I didn't study, my roommate kept me up all night, or they say nothing. They just say, yeah, I didn't do well. These are actually optimistic statements. Pessimistic statements would be things like, I'm no good, I'm stupid, I'm not good at anything. So you notice how they're much more negative, personal, and pervasive. And this is actually what they're testing for. The ASQ is free, it can be administered. There's only 12 hypothetical scenarios that come out in the quiz. This could actually be, it's really a multiple choice question, so this can be given to students. You get 6 scenarios that are really, really positive, like you suddenly became rich, and you have to explain why that happened. And then 6 are really bad, like you had a bad date or you failed a class. And you have to rate 1 through 7 why this hypothetical outcome happened. Even when you try to tell people that this is an optimism quiz and even tried to pay them $100 to fake the quiz, you can't fake it the way the quiz is actually written. So they're really looking for 3 areas: personalization, permanence, and pervasiveness. And I'll explain what those 3 mean. So personalization is internal cause or external cause for why events happen. So let's look at personalization when your team gets a bad grade at school. An optimist would blame external causes, such as the team fought the whole time, no one showed up for meetings, half the team were free riders. So notice where I bolded the external blame. The pessimist looks for internal causes, they blame themselves. So notice where I bolded the internal causes. I dragged my team down, I'm no good at teams. So even though these are all negative comments, they actually can be split between optimistic and pessimistic. Now, permanence is the second thing we're looking for, and we split that between temporary and permanent reasons. So let's say you earn a D in class. An optimist would look at this as a temporary setback. It's just this one class. I'll do better next time. My family issues distracted me. So see how these were things that aren't going to happen again in the future? A pessimist, meanwhile, makes them permanent. I'll never be a good student. That subject will always beat me. So are you starting to get some names of some students that you know that talk like this? Next comes into pervasiveness, whether the situation is specific to the event or pervasive to their entire life and goes into other areas of their life. So let's say that you didn't get accepted into the program. An optimist would give a specific reason. That's a tough program to get into. They only take 1 out of 2,000 students. So these very specific reasons why they didn't do well. A pessimist makes it pervasive. No program will want me, not just this one, but all the others. I'm bad at everything, not just school, but sailing, hiking, biking, doesn't really matter what it is, I'm bad at everything. So the MetLife ASQ hiring study really shows with some pretty clear data why it's important to actually interview for optimism and train for it. So this is how MetLife typically hires people, and it's similar to how people admit students into college. You look for empirical and theory-based. So the empirical is actual experience. Did you get good grades? Have you been successful in the past? And then the theory part, are you intelligent? Do you have aptitude? And are you motivated? Now, with the MetLife test, only 30% of applicants scored above a 12, which was their cutoff to get an interview. If you got over a 12, you went to the interview. If the manager liked them, very ambiguous, very unclear on how they would choose, then they get a job offer. The problem is that they had many high scores, but there were not enough high scorers to staff the place. So not enough people even got above a 12 to hit the staffing needs. So they were actually understaffed. So the question came in, could poor scorers, people who didn't get a 12, actually do well? And if so, how would you pick them? So it was a bit of a tough study to do. And what they were looking at is the original method of hiring: aptitude, ability, motivation. Basically, are you smart and do you want it? That was the basic thing they were testing for. But here's the blind spot. Let's say that in these following scenarios, you are smart and you do want it. But look at these. I'm an amazing athlete. I want to win the gold medal, but I think I'm going to lose. Do you want to bet on that person? I mean, they have the aptitude, they have the motivation, but they don't have the optimism. And you can see if someone says, I think I'm going to lose the race, even though I'm an amazing athlete, they may very well lose that race. So what they wanted to add in was optimism, adding the third question, do you think you can do it? So the new self-talk would be, I'm an amazing athlete, I want to win the gold medal, and I can win it. So this is the third thing that they started to test for. So to look at this first, they looked at agents that had already been hired with the old method. Then they gave them the ASQ, and they split them into optimists and pessimists. So half the top scorers became optimists, and those that were in the bottom of the ASQ were the pessimists. So the top 50% optimists versus bottom 50% pessimists, the top 50 sold 37% more insurance in years 1 and 2. If you made it even more rigorous and looked at the top 10% optimists versus the bottom 10% pessimists, it was an 88% more selling in years 1 and 2. So basically what it means is the degree of optimism is actually important. It's not just a strict cutoff. So the next test they did was for 104 agents were hired via the career profile, the old way, and then they were given the ASQ. And all of them, interestingly enough, had scored above average for national optimism. So the most optimistic 25 in this test sold 50% more than the rest of the group, and the least optimistic 25 were 300% more likely to quit. Now, when they combined both test scores, so they were looking at the original MetLife test and then also the ASQ, if you were in the top 50% of both scoring methodologies, you sold 56% more than your peer group. So then came what they call the Special Force study, where they took 15,000 applicants who took the career profile and the ASQ, and they said, okay, goal number one, we're going to hire 1,000 people with the old method. But remember, they don't get enough people to fully staff the place doing it that way. So the goal number two is that they were going to hire 100 people if they were in the top 50% of the ASQ, but they barely failed the career profile. So they got like a 9 to 11 out of 12. You know, this was a $3 million risk. So it was actually a $3 million study. 100 agents were hired who didn't do the 12, but they were optimists. And they paid that $30,000 to train them. Well, let's see what happened to them. So the people that passed the career profile versus those that failed the career profile and got high ASQ, in year one, the people that had passed with the old method, 8% outsold the pessimists. In year two, 31% outsold the pessimists because they were still given the ASQ, they just weren't hired on that basis. But those that had failed the original method career profile but had high optimism, they outsold the pessimists by 21%. By year two, they outsold by 57%, and they outsold the entire career profile group by 20% overall. So the two side effects that they noticed were that optimists kept improving over pessimists, perhaps being encouraged by their own success. And then optimism actually predicted selling results as well as the career profile, which means you can also predict GPA using the same thing. So the new MetLife hiring policy is that if you pass the career profile with a 12 or higher, and you're in the top 75% of the ASQ, which isn't too hard to do, then you get hired. But then they also will take people who barely fail, and you're in top 50% of optimism, which means you could take in students who don't meet the academic requirements. They barely fail them, meaning that they were close to it, but they didn't quite get it. But if they're very optimistic, you might want to let them in. Other best practices are avoid hiring or taking in pessimists because they do drag down the rest of the group. They're toxic. And hiring strong optimists with slightly lower aptitude and motivation may actually give you higher performance. Now, the way that we can do this is with some simple interview questions. One of them would be, tell me about a great success and why it turned out that way. And then tell me about a failure and why it turned out that way. And then you can keep this chart at your desk while they're giving you the answer. So an optimist will give an external reason, they messed me up, it was their fault. A pessimist will give a personal reason, I'm stupid. An optimist will give a temporary reason, next time will be better. A pessimist will be permanent, I'll never get it. An optimist will be specific, it was just this one-off bad situation. But a pessimist will be pervasive, I'm bad at everything. So here are some other suggestions for raising GPA. Interview for optimism, administer the ASQ to applicants. It only takes a few minutes and it is free. And then teach optimism to incoming freshmen. And I think if we do this, we'll actually have higher GPA. We'll also have happier students that are going to be able to perform better and savor their college experience. So I hope this study is helpful to you. And I hope we start testing people for optimism and getting that GPA up. Take care, and thanks for listening. Bye-bye.